At our baby's gender reveal, my husband's mother gripped my arm and whispered, "It better be a boy or you've failed this family." I stepped back and announced, "It's twins." The crowd cheered. Then I leaned in, and neither takes after your side. My name's Lena, and if you had asked me a couple years ago what I thought my life would look like at 34, I would have told you something pretty basic. Maybe a quiet job I liked, a home that felt like mine, a husband who made me laugh, and maybe a kid or two eventually. I grew up in Wilmington, North Carolina, in a 2-bedroom house that always smelled like coffee and lemon pledge. My dad's a mechanic, the kind who always came home with grease under his nails, but never missed dinner. My mom stayed home mostly, worked at a local bakery part-time, and kept everything in our world running smoother than Dad's best-tuned engine. I wasn't born into wealth or name recognition, but I was raised with love. Real love. The kind you felt when someone left the porch light on for you even when they were dead tired. The kind that forgave, even when it hurt. That's what I thought mattered. And then I met Arlo. It was a warm spring evening in Durham, one of those first weekends where the sun stays out just a bit longer and the breeze still has a little bite to it. I was at a food truck festival with some friends, standing in line for a pulled pork sandwich when I heard someone behind me argue with the guy working the grill about the best kind of barbecue. "Carolina, all the way," he said with the confidence of someone who'd die on that hill. I turned around, ready to offer my unsolicited opinion, because, food is serious business, and that's how I met Arlo. He was taller than me, had this mess of dark hair and warm brown eyes. He smiled easy, like it was just part of his face. He offered me a bite of his brisket without hesitation. I joked that he might be a serial killer. He said, "That's fair. But I make great brisket." 6 months later, we got married under a big oak tree in my parents' backyard, my mom crying into a handkerchief and my dad pretending not to. The first year was good. Simple, steady. We bought a modest townhouse in Cary, not too far from either of our jobs. He worked in accounting, I was doing freelance marketing for small businesses. We adopted a rescue cat that hated everyone but Arlo, and we fell into the rhythm of married life pretty comfortably. And then came the part nobody tells you about, the merging of families. From the start, it was clear that Arlo's mother, Martha, did not approve of me. Not in the classic mother-in-law way where she criticizes your cooking or subtly hints that her son deserves better. No, Martha was more refined than that. She had a way of smiling through gritted teeth, of making a compliment sound like an insult wrapped in pearls. I remember the first time I visited her home in Charleston. She greeted me with a nod, not a hug, and offered me tea in a porcelain cup I was afraid to hold. Her house was pristine, the kind of place where you knew kids were never allowed to run barefoot. I sat stiffly on a velvet sofa while she asked pointed questions about my education, my family, and my future ambitions. Martha came from money. Old money. Her father had been a judge, her mother a socialite, and she herself had spent most of her life ensuring that legacy continued. She went to cotillion balls. She chaired charity boards. She knew how to KLL a person with kindness, and I was no match for her subtle warfare. "She's not from the right background," I overheard her say once when she thought I was out of earshot. "Sweet girl, but she doesn't understand tradition. Arlo needs someone who fits." Arlo defended me, of course, but not forcefully. He believed she'd come around. That once she saw how happy we were, she'd soften. I wasn't so sure. When I got pregnant 2 years into our marriage, Arlo was ecstatic. I was terrified and overjoyed all at once. We hadn't been trying exactly, but we weren't not trying either. It just happened. And suddenly everything changed. Martha's involvement in our lives intensified. She insisted on helping us find a doula, criticized the nursery colors I picked, and dropped passive-aggressive comments about keeping the family name strong. And then one afternoon, when Arlo was out grabbing groceries, she sat beside me on the couch, folded her hands neatly in her lap, and said, "Lena, it's important that this child be a boy. You understand, don't you? It's not personal. It's just legacy." I looked at her, stunned, my hand resting over my growing belly. "You don't get to decide that," I said. "No," she agreed. "But you will be judged for it, whether you like it or not." I told Arlo. He brushed it off. "She doesn't mean it like that," he said, rubbing my back. "She just cares too much." I started to wonder if I'd married a man who would always choose not to see. We agreed on a gender reveal party, mostly to keep family happy. My sister, Kendra, offered to host it in her backyard in Raleigh. She's always been the glue in our family, the one who shows up, organizes, remembers birthdays, and mediates when tempers rise. She went all out. Balloons, cupcakes with colored filling, the whole deal. That morning, I felled off. My back ached, my stomach was tight, and everything felt just a bit too loud. I told myself it was nerves. I smiled through the nausea, wore a pale blue dress that barely fit anymore, and tried to focus on the fact that we were about to find out who we were bringing into the world. Arlo was buzzing with excitement, shaking hands, accepting hugs and congratulations like he'd personally constructed this baby cell by cell. And then Martha arrived, wearing white. A fitted linen dress, pearls around her neck, not a hair out of place. She kissed Arlo's cheek and looked me up and down like I was the help. "You look flushed," she said. "I'm 7 months pregnant, Martha," I replied. She didn't even blink. The party was in full swing when Kendra tapped her glass and called everyone's attention. Arlo and I stood in front of the cake, hands linked, pretending we weren't sweating. And then, without warning, Martha stepped beside me, leaned in, and gripped my arm. Her fingers were cold and firm. "It better be a boy," she whispered. "Or you failed this family." Time stopped. The air went thick, and for a moment, I wasn't standing in my sister's backyard surrounded by loved ones. I was a woman, alone, being told that her worth depended on the shape of the child inside her. I stepped back. Just a little. Then I smiled, raised the K&F, and with hands that didn't shake, I cut into the cake. Pink. Then blue. It took a second for people to register. "It's twins," I said loudly. The crowd erupted. My mom gasped. Arlo looked like he might pass out. Kendra squealed and threw confetti that stuck in my hair. And then I leaned in close to Martha, just enough so only she could hear. "And neither takes after your side." Her face didn't move, but her eyes told the whole story. A crack in the facade, a glimpse of the woman behind the mask. She stepped back, smiled, clapped even. But I knew something had shifted. Not just in her, but in me. The rest of the afternoon blurred together in a haze of laughter, questions, and congratulations. Everyone wanted to know if we had names picked, if we knew the genders, if we were ready. Ready. That word kept echoing in my head like a question I didn't know how to answer. Arlo was glowing. He made the rounds like a proud senator, his smile wide and infectious. My mom kept refilling my lemonade, whispering prayers of relief that I'd have help raising 2 babies instead of just 1. Kendra hovered, a hawk with a clipboard, making sure the caterer didn't forget the crab dip and that no one let the dog near the cake table. And Martha? She lingered. Always within view, but never too close. She made polite conversation with guests, complimented the decor, and posed for photos when asked. But every so often, I caught her watching me. Not glaring, not even frowning. Just watching, like she was recalculating. Reassessing what to make of me now. Arlo and I drove home in near silence. The car was full of leftover balloons, 2 containers of potato salad, and an energy that neither of us wanted to break. I stared out the window, one hand on my stomach, trying to picture what life would look like with 2 infants. The house suddenly felt too small. The future too loud. "Twins," Arlo finally said, a kind of reverent disbelief in his voice. "I still can't believe it." I nodded. Surprise. He reached for my hand. "You did good today. You looked beautiful." I didn't reply. Not because I didn't appreciate it, but because something in me had shifted. There was a tension in my chest that I couldn't name, a coil of something resentment, fear, tightening just below the surface. That night, after Arlo fell asleep with one hand resting on my belly, I sat up in bed and reread the letter my doctor had sent 2 weeks ago. 2 healthy babies. Fraternal. 1 girl. 1 boy. I hadn't told Arlo because I wanted the reveal to be genuine. But now, reading those words again, all I felt was pressure. Not just from Martha, but from the world. From expectations I hadn't signed up for. From roles I wasn't sure I could play. In the following weeks, Martha's involvement intensified. She called daily. Showed up unannounced with baby name books and family crests. "This one," she'd say, tapping a page with a manicured finger, "was your great-grandfather's name. It's strong, traditional, honorable." I'd smile, nod, say I'd think about it, then close the book the moment she left. She offered to redecorate our guest room into a nursery at her expense. I declined. She brought over a monogrammed baby blanket embroidered with the initials A, J, B, and said, "Just in case you come to your senses." I didn't ask what the J stood for. I didn't want to know. Arlo tried to stay out of it. He walked a tightrope between love and obligation, between me and the woman who raised him. I could see the pull in his eyes, the quiet guilt when he left to have lunch with her and came back quieter than he left. "She just wants to be involved," he said one evening, standing in the kitchen in his work clothes, sleeves rolled up, tie askew. "There's involved," I replied, chopping vegetables with more force than necessary, and there's controlling. Guess which one she's doing? He sighed. She's not perfect. But she's trying. So am I said softly. But I don't have a history of threats and ultimatums riding on whether our baby has a penis. He winced. That's not fair, isn't it? The silence between us stretched. A week later, we attended a family brunch at Martha's estate in Charleston. It was a grand, sprawling home with columns and a driveway lined with magnolia trees. The kind of place that looked like it had never seen dust or clutter. Arlo's cousins were there, polished and polite, all smiles and summer dresses. I wore flats and a flowy maternity dress that made me feel like a tent. We sat around a long table eating quiche and scones, the kind of brunch you didn't touch unless you knew which fork to use. I excused myself to use the restroom and found Martha in her study, holding a small, velvet box. I wanted to give this to you in private, she said, opening the box to reveal a delicate gold bracelet. It's a family heirloom, passed down to the firstborn daughters for generations. Assuming, of course, one of the twins is a girl. I looked at her, surprised. Thank you. She smiled. It's important to honor traditions, Lena. No matter how modern we think we are. I took the box, unsure whether to feel flattered or manipulated. Probably both. That night, back home, I placed the bracelet in a drawer and didn't mention it to Arlo. The nursery became a battlefield of ideas. I wanted soft greens and yellows, animals and clouds. Martha pushed for navy and maroon, crests and quotes from Latin texts. She even sent us a custom wallpaper sample with the family motto, Virtus ante omnia. Virtue before all. I stared at it for a long time, then tossed it in the trash. Around 8 months, I started having trouble sleeping. My back ached constantly. The twins seemed to never rest, jabbing me from the inside at all hours. I began nesting hard, scrubbing baseboards, organizing the pantry, folding baby clothes with military precision. Arlo became more distant. Not cold, just distracted. Always on the phone. Always texting someone. I wanted to ask, but didn't. Part of me was afraid to know the answer. One evening, while folding towels in the laundry room, I heard him in the living room, murmuring into his phone. I stepped closer. She just gets so defensive, he said. I don't know how to talk to her anymore. There was a pause. A quiet hum of agreement from the other end. A woman's voice. I stepped back into the hallway. Heart pounding. He hung up a few moments later and walked into the kitchen like nothing had happened. I didn't say anything. Not that night. But something in me had changed again. I started writing things down. Feelings. Observations. A record of every interaction with Martha. Every time Arlo dismissed my concerns. Every name she suggested. Every dig she made about my family. I wasn't sure what I was building, but it felt important. The pressure of 2 babies inside me mirrored the pressure of 2 lives pulling me in different directions, my old life, my instincts, my values, and the new one I had been thrust into without ever truly being asked. I told myself it would all make sense once they were born. Once we were holding them. Once we could call them by name. But something told me that wasn't true. The days blurred into each other. At 35 weeks, I was officially enormous and permanently exhausted. I couldn't bend over without groaning. My ankles were puffy balloons. I started sleeping in the recliner in the living room where I could lean back just enough to breathe. Arlo brought me tea at night, rubbed my feet sometimes, and told me I was doing amazing. But I could feel the distance widening between us like a quiet tide pulling out. We barely spoke about the woman on the phone. I never asked. He never offered. But the silence between us became a language of its own. I filled it with nursery prep and prenatal appointments. He filled it with late nights at work and long drives to clear his head. And Martha? She grew bolder. One afternoon, she showed up with an interior decorator. I thought we could make some changes to the nursery, she said, walking past me like she owned the house. I stared at her. We've already finished it. Yes, she said, walking through the hallway with a click of heels. But it could be more purposeful. Before I could stop her, she was in the nursery, gesturing to the decorator, rattling off fabric swatches and furniture arrangements. I stood in the doorway, one hand on my aching belly, the other gripping the doorframe. Something in me snapped, not loudly, not violently, but like a thread pulled too tightly, finally giving way. Get out, I said. She turned slowly. Excuse me? I said, get out of my house. You don't live here. You don't make decisions here. You don't get to erase me. Her mouth tightened. I'm only trying to help. No, I said. You're trying to control. And I'm done letting you. The decorator froze, her eyes darting between us. Martha adjusted her pearls, her face hard as stone. I'll speak to Arlo. Please do, I said. Maybe he can explain boundaries to you." She left without another word. That night, Arlo came home to find me in the nursery, sitting in the rocking chair, holding a stuffed giraffe like a shield. "She said you were rude," he said, standing in the doorway. I told her the truth, I replied. "If that's rude, so be it." He sighed. "She's just excited. This is important to her." "And it's important to me," I said, looking up. "But that never seems to matter." He came closer, kneeling beside me. "We're almost there. Just a few more weeks." I nodded, but something in me had already stepped away from him. From us. 2 weeks later, I went into labor. It started as a dull ache at midnight. By 2 a.m., the contractions were coming every 7 minutes. Arlo fumbled with the hospital bag while I tried to breathe through the pain. The drive to the hospital was a blur of headlights and clenched teeth. At the hospital, everything moved fast. The nurses were kind, efficient. They hooked me up to monitors, checked my vitals, and paged the OB. Arlo held my hand, murmured encouragement, wiped sweat from my forehead. And then Martha arrived. How she knew, how she always knew, I didn't ask. She swept into the delivery room like royalty, demanded updates, and told the nurse, "I'm the grandmother." I told them to keep her out. They did. But the damage was done. The twins were born just after 9 a.m., first the girl, then the boy. I heard their cries before I saw their faces. I cried too. Not from pain, but from the release of it all. The 9 months of tension, of pressure, of trying to be enough. Arlo cried when he held them. He looked at me like he'd just witnessed a miracle. And for a moment, I believed in us again. But it didn't last. Within an hour, Martha was outside the nursery, demanding to know the names. She'd brought a silver spoon set engraved with the initials A, J, B, again. I told the nurse to tell her we were resting. We named them Rowan and Elodie. Names we picked quietly, late one night, before things got too heavy. Names that didn't belong to anyone else. Names that felt like a new beginning. When Martha found out, she didn't say anything directly. But I heard through Arlo's sister that she was disappointed we hadn't honored tradition. I didn't care. The first few weeks were a blur of feedings, diapers, and sleepless nights. I was sore, emotional, overwhelmed. Arlo helped when he could, but work called him back quickly. And I started to notice he wasn't just tired, he was absent. He'd say he was working late, but his eyes wouldn't meet mine. He left his phone face down. He started showering in the guest bathroom. Little things. Quiet things. Things I noticed. And still, I said nothing. I focused on Rowan's tiny fingers, Elodie's sleepy sighs, the way their eyes followed light across the ceiling. One night, around 3 a.m., I woke to find Arlo gone. Not in the guest room. Not in the nursery. Gone. His car wasn't in the driveway. I sat in the rocking chair, nursing Elodie, my heart heavy. An hour later, he came home. He didn't explain. I didn't ask. But the silence between us was deafening now. A week after that night, I followed Arlo. I waited until he left with the same rushed explanation, something about a late-night call with a client, and 20 minutes later, I bundled the twins into their car seats and drove. I didn't even know where I was going, just that I needed to see it for myself. I parked across the street from a small, unassuming townhouse on the edge of town. I didn't know the address, but my gut did. His car was there. The lights were on. I sat in my car, Rowan asleep in the back seat, Elodie fussing lightly. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't get out. I just sat there, watching the windows flicker with silhouettes I didn't recognize. Maybe she was younger. Maybe she listened better. Maybe she never told his mother no. It didn't matter. I drove home. 3 days later, I spoke to a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, a specialist in family estate law. Someone who knew how to navigate wealth, manipulation, and the kind of paper trail Martha liked to pretend didn't exist. I had questions. About inheritance. About shared property. About protecting my children. I also found a therapist. And a daycare. It took 3 months to build the file. Every voicemail, every message, every bank transaction. Every time Arlo lied. Every time Martha crossed the line. It was all there. When I confronted him, I didn't raise my voice. I waited until he came home one Saturday morning after being at the office. I handed him the folder. Thick. Heavy. He flipped through it in silence. His face drained slowly, page by page. "You were watching me?" he asked. "No," I said. I was listening. He didn't argue. Maybe because he knew he couldn't win. Maybe because part of him was relieved. Either way, I told him what I wanted: full custody, the house, and a clean exit. He could keep his job, his new life, even his mother. But not us. The divorce was quiet. Civil, boring, even. Martha, of course, tried to intervene. She called, threatened, pleaded. She sent a family attorney to renegotiate the terms. I sent him away with a notarized letter and a court date. When the settlement came through, I used part of it to start a small design consultancy, something I could do from home. Kendra helped me with clients. My mom watched the twins twice a week. I repainted the nursery, added a soft rug, filled it with light and music. But the best part came later. 3 months after the papers were signed, Martha invited me to her annual charity brunch. She sent the invitation by courier. Handwritten. Embossed. I RSVP'd yes. I wore a soft green dress. Comfortable, understated. The twins came too, in matching outfits with a subtle pattern I'd designed myself. Martha met us at the entrance, her smile frozen in place. "Lena," she said, "I wasn't expecting you invited me," I said, stepping past her into the grand foyer. Inside, the house was filled with the city's finest lawyers, doctors, socialites. People who cared about appearances and remembered every detail. I let them ask questions. I told the truth, calmly and clearly. "Oh, the twins are great," I said. "Arlo? We're not together anymore. It just wasn't working." I didn't mention the affair. I didn't need to. I let the story tell itself. And when someone asked about the twins' names, how beautiful and unique they were, I smiled and said, "They're not from either side of the family." I wanted something fresh. Something not weighed down by history. Martha was standing close enough to hear. She didn't say a word. But for the rest of the afternoon, she kept adjusting her bracelet, tightening her jaw, and drinking more wine than usual. And that was enough. The real revenge wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cruel. It was quiet, steady, and undeniable. It was knowing that I had been measured and found more than enough. That I had rewritten the story, not with bitterness, but with boundaries. That my children would grow up in a house where love wasn't conditional, where names didn't come with strings, where the air was light and laughter was allowed to echo. And that Martha, for all her control and legacy and perfection, had lost the only thing she truly wanted: access to us.